with energy and agriculture, it's not necessarily just those two disciplines that cross over. You end up throwing in planning, environmental, tax is obviously important in these schemes. And unless you've got an advisor that fully understands the whole package with you, with your energy, regulatory, tax, property, planning as one, it can be easy for things to fall through the cracks. So it's important to ensure you do cover all bases with these schemes. One of the biggest factors to consider might sound obvious, but it's the land involved. And by that, I don't mean the land where the actual equipment itself will be situated, the red line, if you like. That's generally self-explanatory. It's the wider land uses, which might be triggered by a planning obligation, for example, things like habitat enhancement or biodiversity net gain, as we call it. And it's factoring those areas of land into the scheme and which bits might then be sterilised that you hadn't perhaps considered when agreeing the terms. So consider where the corridors for cables and access might be, as well as other areas of land that might be needed for the wider scheme. One area I'd recommend protecting is the future proofing of the land. It might be that the scheme you've signed up to doesn't actually go ahead. We've seen a lot of national grid constraints on which sites are actually going to come forward. So it's important to ensure that you're perhaps not putting all your eggs in that one basket. And it might be that if your site is situated near a big national grid substation, that other developers might want a corridor of land or some other way of laying cables through your land that could be an additional revenue stream. And maybe have one eye on any future proofing of that land, as well as your own potential development opportunities for other land uses, which might sit alongside the energy development. So with wayleaves and easements, it's quite legal jargon, which I try and avoid and talk about rights. So we're really talking about cables in the main and where they're going to go. So it's quite a simple concept, but with the rights come restrictions on what you can and can't do with your land, as well as the developer maybe ensuring that you don't damage or upset what equipment's in the ground or overhead. So it's important to consider future development proposals on where those rights might be if you want to move it in the future, as well as considering how much land you want to give up for those rights to be exercised within, and not particularly get hung up on whether it's an easement or a wayleave. We're really talking about rights to stick equipment in other parts of your land. I think historically most landowners had perhaps an agricultural advisor and maybe a separate advisor for energy, which is great if they're experts in their field. The concern is that something might fall between the cracks, as a great energy lawyer might understand the tax implications for inheritance tax, or a good agricultural lawyer might get the tax side of things but might not understand the impact on subsidies that it might have. So it's important, if you can, to get an advisor who understands all of the nuances of the scheme to ensure it can mesh together, bearing in mind the numerous legal frameworks which weren't really built to sit together, and ensuring that nothing really gets missed or has an unintended consequence for agreeing one term for one particular regime. There are quite a few different trends for different technologies. I'd say if I was to generalise this, it would be on scale. So looking at solar farms is a good example. The threshold for planning permission not needing Secretary of State approval has recently changed from 50 megawatts to 100 megawatts. And putting that in real terms is kind of 200, 250 acres up to potentially 500 acres of land. So that potentially could see more solar schemes of that scale being brought forward. Looking at other technologies like anaerobic digestion, a big part of that is the fuel, the feedstock which goes into that. And you've probably seen government initiatives around food waste and the separation of that being mandated for households. theoretically from March this year, although not all councils are fully there yet, that if that's cheaper to power or feed these digestion plants, it might bring the cost down and see more of the clean methane being produced out of those plants, which can be put back into the grid, as it costs a little bit more money to build, but with cheaper fuel could lead to more of those plants coming forward.